debt-free.
So I guess I'm going to owe a little bit more money because you promised me 7 minutes, and that's about what I'm going to take. So.
Well, we're going to give you 3.
Well, I don't think you'll cut me off. Good afternoon. My name is Meredith Hamilton Archer, and I'm the daughter of former Newport News Delegate Phil Hamilton. In 2011, my dad was sentenced to 9.5 years in a federal prison. The convictions were bribery and extortion.
Okay, honey. Take a breath.
As a member of the House Appropriations Committee, he signed the state budget, which allotted money for the creation of a teacher training center at Old Dominion University for disadvantaged youth. The reality is that my dad never put in any amendment to fund a training center at ODU. Thank you. The ODU budget amendment included in the budget without his knowledge or discussion was put in the budget by 2 Senate staffers who testified to this during his trial. He never approached or discussed a job at ODU in exchange for support of any ODU budget item. An ODU official who was granted immunity to testify against my dad at trial approached him because of his proven success with leadership and teacher training programs while employed by Newport News Public Schools. Regardless of this, a political witch hunt ensued, and despite the fact that he was a lifelong educator and qualified for such a position, and despite the fact that the presiding judge in his case stated that the government's case against him had, quote, major credibility issues, and despite the fact that every single witness testified that my dad said and did nothing to try to get the budget amendment for an ODU center passed, and despite the fact that the government star witness who had been granted immunity by the government stated under oath that he had to, quote, toe the government's line in order to maintain his immunity, my dad was convicted in May 2011. And sentenced to 9.5 years in prison. His sentence began on September 19th, 2011, and he remains incarcerated today. I could never have predicted this season in our life, and I say our because an individual is not incarcerated alone. When someone goes to prison, their family goes with them. While the families are still at home, I can assure you that we are experiencing the devastation of incarceration nonetheless. I am humbled by the opportunity to share what I have learned through my personal experiences with the criminal justice system over the past 10 years, and I understand that there are many other families that have experienced far worse. So I will do my best to speak for them today as well. We hear all the time that America has the best criminal justice system in the world, and sadly, that may be true. I have limited knowledge of international criminal justice policies, so I will not speak on that, but I will say, even if the United States has the best justice system in the world, that does not in any way take away from the fact that we have gotten it wrong in so many ways, and a staggering number of Americans are paying the price with their freedom, and in some cases their lives, and this simply cannot continue. I believe in law and order, and I know that there are many crimes that warrant a period of incarceration for various reasons. I am in no way suggesting that actions do not have consequences. However, until the American criminal justice system, and the prison system specifically, stops acting as a big business and starts acting in the best interest of the people, we will continue to see recidivism rates and the inmate population increase. Martin Luther King Jr. believed in justice for all. The Pledge of Allegiance promises justice for all. Our Constitution promises a fair trial for all. And yet the truth is that within our criminal justice system, this principle is severely lacking at best. Until lifetime appointments for judges become a thing of the past and are instead replaced with a system of judicial checks and balances like every other branch of government, there will be no justice for all. Until there is not a single judge that, quote, lives to put people in jail, there will be no justice for all. Until there is no longer any sitting judge who during his time as a prosecutor, quote, offers no apologies for threatening a mentally disabled man with the death penalty into taking an Alford plea despite knowing that the DNA evidence proved the man's innocence, there will be no justice for all. Until every judge is truly unbiased and does not consider himself to be a, quote, lifelong prosecutor, there will be no justice for all. Until there is no defendant in America whose fate is determined by a judge who is brazen enough to dedicate his own published memoir to, quote, all prosecutors, there will be no justice for all. Until a defendant does not have to fight for their freedom against a prosecution with unlimited resources and financial means, there will be no justice for all. Until mandatory minimum sentences become a thing of the past, and instead each defendant is treated as an individual where the totality of their life is considered, there will be no justice for all. Until post-trial motions for reconsideration are given to an objective third-party judge rather than going back to the same trial judge, there will be no justice for all. Until prosecutors no longer threaten their way into plea agreements, there will be no justice for all. Until a defendant can testify on his or her own behalf without the possibility of a harsher sentence if they choose to do so, there will be no justice for all. Until there is equity in sentencing for defendants with similar convictions and criminal histories, there will be no justice for all. The United States represents approximately 4.4% of the world's population, and yet we house 22% of the world's prisoners. Since the 1920s, our prison rates have dramatically increased, and today approximately 2.5 million people are currently incarcerated in the United States. It's clear that what we are doing in America is not working. From what I've learned about the federal prison system over the past 8 years, even minimum security federal prison camps, like where my dad has spent the last 7 years and 4 months, the focus is on punishment rather than rehabilitation. Inmates, more often than not, are stripped of their dignity for years while they serve their time, and when they are released back into their communities, we have policies in place that continue to punish them. It's harder for a felon to get a legitimate job, find decent housing, or even get a credit card, regardless of their financial means. And yet people fail to understand how our system is set up to stack the deck against those who have already served their time. Inmates are people too, and despite the choices you have made, both good and bad, every one of us could find ourselves on the wrong side of the law by the time the sun sets today. And even if you are innocent, that unfortunately does not mean you will not be incarcerated. So while most people have not been personally affected, we can no longer afford to turn a blind eye to the injustices occurring every day in both court, rooms, and correctional institutions. Committing a crime, especially one that will allow someone to serve their time and return to society, should not strip someone of their dignity or civil rights. And yet in so many cases, this is exactly what happens while incarcerated. On December 24th, 2016, my dad was asleep around 2 a.m. when he was attacked by several inmates and beaten in the head with a padlock and a sock. How did Fort Dix choose to resolve this? My dad, the assault victim, was immediately put into the special housing unit reserved for disciplinary actions. He was kept in the SHU for approximately 6 weeks, and during that time he was denied adequate heat, a thorough medical exam for his injuries, contact with family who were never notified by the institution of his assault or placement in the SHU, his legal paperwork necessary for meeting the deadline of his last Supreme Court appeal, and daily showers. He was locked in a cell for 23 hours a day until he was finally transferred to a new facility 6 weeks later. Years prior to this incident, he had a seizure as a result of an untreated concussion a few days before, fell from his top bunk onto a concrete floor, and was hospitalized for several days, again without our knowledge. When he returned from a 4-day hospital stay, he was placed in the SHU. When the emergency room doctor requested to see him again in 30 days, Fort Dix denied the doctor's request. People learn what they live. So when inmates are surrounded by staff members that demean them, when they are denied necessary medical care, when their families are never notified when medical emergencies and hospitalizations occur, when assault victims are punished like perpetrators, then it becomes glaringly obvious that our justice system is working against the common good of not only the inmates, but all of the American people. If the outrageous amount of money currently spent to house inmates that pose no danger to society, and instead those individuals serve their time on home confinement and work release, there would be so much more our justice system could do to provide rehabilitative programs that would enact real change, starting with separating far less families, which is of the utmost importance to breaking the cycle of incarceration. More serious offenders could serve their time while receiving education, counseling, and compassion, and return home with a feeling of hope and the skills to make a better life for themselves. Former inmates could come home and be a benefit to their communities rather than viewed by others as a threat. When we see people through the lens of grace and second chances rather than judgment and condemnation, we all benefit. When we treat people like they matter, they come to believe it too, and they strive for a better life. The great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. believed love was the great equalizer and the path for which change would come. I hope that with the passage of the First Step Act, signed into law just last month, that Washington is beginning to see that our criminal justice system is in need of major reforms and more compassion and humanity. But the First Step Act is just that, a first step. There is so much more that needs to be done to provide justice and dignity for all in our court and prison systems, but rest assured it will take a lot of voices to make it happen. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said that our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. As I stand here today, I make a promise to my dad, other inmates, and the families of those affected by incarceration that I will be a voice for them. I will not be silent, and I hope you won't either. Thank you.